Usually I use these meetings to provide the feedback, but again, since it's the first week, I provide more feedback than usual, so I don't want to beat a dead horse. That being said, we are recording. You can get extra credit for this. Jennifer, I hope you have something to write with. What I'm going to do
I
is,
do. Yeah.
okay, and anybody else watching this video at a later date or time, I'm going to say a series of attendance words throughout the meeting, and what you'll need to do is write those down, and then when we're done with the meeting or you're done with the video, you'll want to email those to me. Tell me which course you're taking and which video or meeting you are responding to, and then I'll give you your extra credit. And then also at the very end, after all the words, I'm going to ask you to come up with one question based on the information I just gave you in this video. Kind of as proof that you were paying attention, but also obviously hopefully to answer a question. So even if you think you understand everything that I said in the video, make sure you come up with one question, even if it's just me verifying that you actually do understand. So that being said, let's get started. And I guess the first word for attendance will be actually your initials. So JH, not really a word at all, but JH is the first so-called word for attendance. So really quickly, my goal here for this module 2 meeting is, even though it's we're almost done with module 2, is to give you some brief feedback from module 1, and then to give you some heads up from module 2, and then that's it. So let's jump into it really quickly. Let's look at the discussion, module 1 discussion. I'm gonna give blanket advice talking about things that I saw, mistakes, most of the mistakes I saw, I should say. So if it was a common mistake, I'll bring it up. So one thing I want to reiterate that some people didn't get is this discussion isn't really about Cole, right? This discussion is all about the virtue ethics, because that was part of module 1, right? So I had to choose a concept for module 1 that I wanted the discussion to be about, and it happened to be about not the virtue ethics, but the different ethical points of view, right? So the idea here was to demonstrate that you understand these different ethical points of view. And it just so happens that the way we're doing that is saying, hey, should we continue to use coal to produce electricity? I only chose that question because we live in West Virginia, so a lot of people are familiar with this topic, and that's the only reason. A lot of people went above and beyond, possibly on accident, really making an argument for or against coal, but that's really not the point here. But we'll talk about the pros and cons of coal later. So again, the idea was to demonstrate that you understand these different ethical points of view. That being said, one of the most common mistakes is people didn't say which ethical point of view they used. That was one of the more common mistakes. And then beyond that, and I'll direct you here, every module, what in the world? Okay, anyway, here we go. Every module at the bottom of it will have this little grading rubric. Make sure you guys go over this and look at it. Look over your post to make sure it matches this. So some of the common mistakes I saw was this right here. Again, they didn't use a particular ethical point of view, or they didn't tell me what it was. So that's the big one, right? Because since that's the point of this discussion, they would lose 5 points for that. Or they didn't use it, pick one from the correct list really quickly. So when you did your initial reply or your initial post, it should have been one of these ethical points of view that you can see on the screen, virtue ethics, consequence-based ethics, so on and so forth. And then your replies are supposed to be anthropocentric, biocentric, so on and so forth. So, and that's not that big of a deal, which is why you would only lose 1 point for it. But yes, you did lose points for that. And I did see that mistake. And this was a bigger one. So for those people who did do this, they did use an ethical point of view. A lot of people failed to define their ethical point of view and then at least use one sentence to explain how that definition relates to what they want. So those are the biggest mistakes I saw. I did see a couple of people make mistakes where they said, hey, I'm basing it off of this point of view. But then they kind of, in my opinion, they said, like, for example, someone would say virtue ethics. And then they would go on to explain all the bad consequences of coal, which, in my opinion, is incorrect, because when you talk about the consequences of coal, that should be consequence-based ethics. In my opinion, if you're talking about virtue ethics, which is all about, basically what are your intentions, right? So no matter how bad, actually, I shouldn't put it that way. Just one quick example would be, you could say that coal is good based on virtue ethics because, I don't know, people who own coal mines, their intention isn't, or you could assume their intention is not to destroy their environment. The intention is to create energy for our country and employ people. On the flip side, someone else could use virtue ethics and say, have a different argument and say, in their opinion, the intention of these coal miners, or excuse me, these people that own coal mines or company that own coal mines, their intention is to make money regardless of what damage, regardless of the harm they're causing, right? So again, that was my biggest mistake. That was the biggest mistake I saw with people not using an ethical point of view correctly. That, and on the reply, some people did mess that one up a little bit. So for example, ecocentric based ethics is similar but different than biocentric. Ecocentric is saying the whole ecosystem is important, not just all the individual pieces individually, but as a whole. So, for example, and I think I used this example last week, one might argue that killing feral cats is morally okay based on ecocentric ethics because feral cats are an invasive species and they are killing other species that belong here. Therefore, you're protecting the ecosystem. And of course, on biocentric based ethics, it would be you could argue that it is bad to kill feral cats because biocentric ethics focuses on each individual. Each individual organism has intrinsic value, so it wouldn't be okay to kill one animal to save others, so to speak. So, are there any questions? Oh yeah, sorry. And then one last thing: the huge mistake that I keep seeing, and this is very common for the first module, but I did warn about it in last week's meeting when I say be careful of this. You have to properly use your sources. If you don't remember how to do it, click on this. It'll bring you to this document that explains it. Long story short, you absolutely positively have to have at least one non-textbook source for your discussions. Every fact that you include needs to have a source. You need a working link for your source, and your source can't be behind a paywall. Now, the biggest mistake I think I saw, other than completely not using sources, was people including facts that were not in their source. Now, in my opinion, that's a hard mistake to make. Like, where did you come up with this number, but your source never mentioned that number? In my opinion, that seems like you're using AI, which is not allowed, right? Because AI is very bad at producing sources. So make sure every fact you include has a source to back it up. And then finally, also make sure it's obvious how you used your source by starting your sentences like, according to this source, blah, 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 right? Because especially if you have more than one source, I'm grading hundreds of these things per week, and I don't have time to open up all your sources. And then every time I read a fact, check all of your sources to figure out what source it came from, right? So I need to know where it came from. And moving forward, unlike last week, it'll just be a 0 instead of me replying and say, hey, can you please reply and tell me which source came from, or which information came from which source, right? So that won't happen anymore, only because I don't have time. So then finally, before I take your questions about the discussion, this is a great time for me to remind you, before you post discussions or anything else, if you can find the time to meet me online and let me read it over really quickly, at the very least, I can tell you if it'll get 0 credit or some credit. And then beyond that, I could also tell you how to prove it to get the most credit possible. And then finally, the last thing I'll say about that is afterwards, right? So that's before you do it. And then after you do it, you can always resubmit. Well, in this case, it's not resubmit, but you could always do more posts to get more points. If you didn't get the full points, that includes module 1. Even though we're into module 2, you can go back and do some more posts for module 1 to get some more points. And then finally, for any assignment, you can meet me online. Let me give you feedback, and you get a 5% boost to that to that grade. Whew, sorry, I'm going quick because, like I said, I have a deadline. I have to meet somebody at 1. So with all that out of the way, does anybody have questions about the module 1 discussion? Nice. All right. So the next word for attendance will be deduction. Of course, that says deducted, but the next word for attendance is deduction. And now we will move quickly on to lab 1. And again, I'm trying to go through these quickly because I'm in a rush. Also, your time is valuable, so I don't want to waste a lot of your time. And also because this is the first module, I did provide a lot of feedback. So anyway, as usual, when you do a lab, actually, kudos to everybody. Off the top of my head, I think everybody did this properly. The whole part of open up the lab, make yourself a copy, download it as a PDF, upload it. So kudos to that. That being said, I'm going to go over this very quickly and talk about some common mistakes. Rather than waste your time doing this, I will say a lot of people seem to not understand the relationship between a hypothesis and a prediction. So that being said, go back and read this, or come to me and let me just explain it to you separately, because it is an important distinction. You need to understand it. It's going to be a common theme throughout the semester. So take a look at that. I did see this mistake a couple of times, not often, but your hypothesis should match your prediction. In that, if you said in your hypothesis that you think it's going to increase, then you would lose a point if you said it's going to decrease, right? Because that doesn't match. Any questions so far? All right. And I wouldn't say a common mistake, but a big mistake that I saw, but not from many people, is this. When you go to this website to do your experiment, to collect your data, it starts off, where'd it go? There we go. We're starting off at 20 degrees, right? But your table doesn't start off at 20. Your table doesn't start off at 20 degrees. It starts off at 26. Now, I know that might not make sense logically to you, but think scientifically. We're collecting data, and it should be listed not chronologically, but numerically, right? It would make sense to start at the top, the highest, to go to the lowest, or start at the lowest to go to the highest, but it wouldn't make sense to do it chronologically. So make sure you do that correctly, right? So first you would enter that one, and then I think you would go to the next one was this one, and then this one, and then this one, and this one. So that's one mistake that I saw. Another thing that I saw, and no one lost points for this, that's okay. But a lot of times these numbers that you did yourself were very different than those numbers. And that is A-okay. And I'll talk about that later, but no one lost points for that because that was actually kind of expected. Another mistake that I saw, and this is also, you can learn from this moving forward because you're going to have a lot of tables in this semester, your averages. I don't have time to take out a calculator and check all your math. But in this particular case, let's just ignore all this other stuff and pretend like this is the only data we're working with. Your lowest number is 40. Your highest number is 46. So if you wrote anything that was below 40 or over 46, you got it wrong. I could tell by looking, without even checking my math, that is incorrect. So make sure your averages fall within the range of your data. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, really quickly, the graphs were pretty good. Let's talk about some common mistakes. Once again, it makes sense, and a few people make this mistake. If you have a graph, try to picture it in your head. There's the y-axis going up and down, the x-axis going side to side. It would make sense that your x-axis starts at a small number and works its way to the right with a large number, right? So as far as the graph is concerned, right, this should be closest to the left and then farther to the right. Oops, actually, you would be doing the average, sorry. Closest to the left, farther to the right, farther to the right, farther to the right, farther to the right, so on and so forth, which might seem nitpicky, and it is a little bit, but you would only lose 1 point for it. 1 point for it. But it does say it right here. It does tell you the lower temperatures should be on the left and ascend to the higher temperatures on the right. That was a common mistake. Another common mistake I saw was not labeling your axes, right? So make sure you label your x-axis and your y-axis. And I didn't see it much this time, but so far I think this is a better semester. But I did see a couple of times. Where does it say? It says it up here somewhere. Anyway, your bars in this semester should always go up and down, not left to right. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I did see that mistake. I think you guys may have all done it correctly. Anyway, so these are the instructions on how to make a graph. You're going to have to do one for almost every lab, but this is the only lab where I give so many directions on how to do so. So you can always refer back to this lab in the future to see how to make a graph. So are there any questions on the graph making? All right. The next word for attendance is right there. It is analysis. That is the next word for attendance. And speaking of which, this is a mistake. I think everybody figured it out off the top of my head, but just in case anybody didn't, this is a screenshot. I'm asking for a screenshot to prove that you did this whole thing. You went through this whole website, right? So this screenshot wouldn't help me because that's the first step. This screenshot wouldn't help me. Screenshot would not help me because it's the second step. That one's no good. That one's no good. That one's no good. And then we go right here. This is the end of it, right? So this is the screenshot that I need to prove that you went through the whole thing. You will have other questions in the semester where I ask you for screenshots as proof. So just use some common sense and put yourself in my shoes. What am I asking for? I did some people included screenshots of this itself, like the document. I don't need a screenshot of the document. I can see the document, right? I need proof that you did the things that I asked you to do. Any questions about that? All right. And this time I wasn't picky about it, but when you do your screenshot, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here at the bottom right, I kind of need this stuff too. Like I need your whole screen to kind of see that it's your screenshot, because people have done this before where they took a screenshot, or people just copy each other's labs, right? As an online course, so people try to copy each other's labs, and this is one of the way I have of knowing that you copied, right? If you have the same exact screenshot, that's a huge red flag. So again, if there's no questions about that, I'll move forward. I will reiterate this thing because this is another common thing throughout the semester. This is a 3-part question. What was your hypothesis? Was it correct? And then you basically restate what happened with your data. This is redundant. It is repetitive, but you'd be surprised how many students forget their own hypothesis. So this is why I'm requiring you to repeat it, right? So, and you'd be surprised how many students remember their hypothesis, look at their data, and then draw the wrong conclusions, right? So, and again, a couple of people did do that. And I'm not talking bad because this is right, lab 1. This is getting you started thinking scientifically. But this is why you have that redundant question, and you will continue to have redundant questions later in the semester. So, are there any questions about that? Was your this one? Here we go. So this is what I was talking about here, right? A lot of these numbers were way higher than the other numbers, which is a-okay. I just wanted to make sure you recognized it, right? So for those of you who did have higher numbers, off the top of my head, everyone recognized it, so that's perfect. Anyway, here's another common. Well, sorry, were there any questions about number 16? All right, another common mistake. This question, and you're going to get these questions a lot too throughout the semester. I'm asking you to pretend like you are a scientist who physically just did that experiment in person, not virtually. You really did it, and now you're trying to think about how you can improve that experimental design. The most common answer I got, which makes sense, but people said, oh, it was really hard to count the breaths. But that's a website thing, right? That's because you're sitting there looking at an animation and trying to count how many times it opens and closes its mouth. That's not the experiment design thing, right? So I want you to think like a scientist and come up with like, all right, how could I do this? And now that it's past due, I'll go ahead and give you one option. And if you still need to do this lab or you want to make corrections, don't use this example. But one great example would be more fish. This should be a huge theme throughout the semester, because the more data you have, the more statistically significant it is, right? So that's the big one and an easy one, right? Just more fish. So we had more data. Any questions about number 17? All right. Question 18 was pretty straightforward. A few people did forget to include the link to their source. There's not much to say about that. Question 19. All right. Here's a big one, or a common mistake I saw. For the most part, there's really no right or wrong answer to this, but think about this logically. And I did see this mistake. Some people said that they think their results cannot be applied to all goldfish, but only the goldfish in their experiment. I agree. However, then they went on to answer this question and said they think their results can be applied to all fish, which logically doesn't make sense. If you can't apply your results to all goldfish, if you're telling me here that it can only be applied to the fish in your experiment, then logically it makes no sense for you to be able to apply it to all the fish in the world. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions? All right. And then again, that's another common theme. There's going to be questions. So I don't think they're tricky. I don't mean for them to be tricky, but like back-to-back questions where logically, if you answer this thing, then your other questions should be so-and-so. I hope that makes sense. That I'll warn you for those when we come to them later in the semester. This one was pretty straightforward. People did a pretty good job here. How else can you, like, hey, you guys counted the number of breaths. What's other ways you could measure the rate of respiration? And what I was getting at with this hint here was like, hey, you could measure the levels of oxygen or carbon dioxide. As carbon dioxide levels increase, that's an indication that they're breathing more, right? Because as you breathe or as they respire, they're putting out carbon dioxide. So the hint I was getting at, and you didn't have to answer it this way, but conversely, if oxygen levels are dropping, boom, there you go. If oxygen levels are dropping, they must be breathing more because they're using more oxygen. So any questions about number 21? All right, this one's pretty straightforward, but I will mention this mistake. I don't think I took points away for this, but it was a very, 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 very common mistake. A hypothesis is simply a tentative answer to a question that you can test. So you don't need to do the if then thing, not for the hypothesis, right? So does the respiration rate of goldfish increase as they're exposed to increasingly louder noises? I'm amazed no one did this because they would have been correct. They could have just put yes or no. That actually would have sufficed because that is a tentative answer that they could test. Now here's where it does get tricky because in this case you do need an if then statement. The prediction is based on the hypothesis. It's an if then statement that describes how we're going to test the hypothesis. So in this case, you would say something like, I don't know, if we expose goldfish to increasingly louder noises, then, or excuse me, and however you want to do the measurements, right? So, and count the number of breaths they take, then we will find the respiration rate of the goldfish increases. Now, no one completely got it right. Most people got the points for it, and I didn't take away points for it. But again, it's supposed to describe how you are testing the hypothesis. So it should have said something about, again, counting the number of breaths they take, right? Or however it was that you're going to measure the respiration rate. That should have been included, but that's really, really nitpicky, even for me. So I didn't take away any points for that. Whew. Any questions about number 23? All right. Another mistake that people commonly make, a few people made it, is you need to save these as a PDF. I know that sounds picky. I'll explain later, or I'll cross that bridge when I get there with you. But you'll see if you don't save it as a PDF and you continue not doing it, one day you'll see why that's a mistake. But I don't want to waste anyone else's time talking about that. But to do that, once you're done with your file, you're done with your lab and you're ready to turn it in, you're going to hit File, Download as a PDF, and then that's what you're going to upload here to Moodle. Now mine says view all submissions, but you as the student, it should say submit. And that's pretty much it. I won't even talk about the extra credit stuff. I really thank you guys for the input. Some people gave me the input. I love it. I even love the bad, I don't want to say bad ideas, but the ideas that I can't use, I love those too. That way I can at least explain. I can reply to it and explain, hey, thank you for that. Here's why we can't do that. And I love doing that because I would kind of want you to know the method behind the madness so you don't just think I'm being picky or, whatever it is. So thank you guys for all that. And does anybody have questions about Lab 1?
I do. They're like some generic questions though. Okay. So when we answer those questions, can we like yesterday I noticed in module 2, or lab 2, there's a lot of like copy and paste. Are we allowed to copy and paste? Are these supposed to be like complete sentences? And do you want them still in red?
The color
I know that's
doesn't
like
matter.
a really dumb question, but I'm like,
that's not a dumb
do
question
I leave
at all.
this in red, or do I go out there and I try to put this in black to show that I've answered it?
Great question.
Like the copy and paste, I noticed that one of the questions in the lab was like, do not copy and paste this. And I'm like, I could have been copying and pasting these.
Great point.
So
And
you know what I mean? Like I didn't notice it until I got to lab 2 because lab 2 was a lot more questions. But I was curious if we can copy and paste. Are you wanting complete sentences or can we just kind of answer it?
That is a great question. Unless I specifically say don't copy and paste, like you noticed, then definitely, then it's okay. Honestly, I'd prefer you not to, because I want you thinking anybody can copy and paste and not even understand what they're copying and pasting. So I prefer you to read it and answer it in your own words.
Right.
But unless otherwise stated,
it's not like graded on like grammar. Like we're just kind of answering a question, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, granted, I did see, like, for example, I graded a lab for my in-person 101 class today. The grammar was so bad on one of those hypotheses, I literally had no idea what they were saying. So they lost a point, like, because I just really didn't know what they were saying. But if you say, I seen this instead of I saw that, or
oh yeah.
I'm not grading you on your grammar.
Okay,
but to answer your question about the color, I did do it in red on purpose because it's easier for me to grade it. But if you happen to copy and paste something and it changes the color, don't worry about it.
No, I'll leave it in red. Actually, I tried doing black. I did black on my first lab, and then the second lab, I started to get lost on my own questions.
Right,
so it's like, now I know why these are red. So, okay.
Yeah. And that's also why they're in boxes. Yeah, it just helps.
And then I have I do have a general question for the discussions as well. Is there a way to track what we have already responded to. Like, so I noticed that my email is set up with this discussion, and I get all of these emails telling me like what module one, module one discussion. I honestly got to the point where I forgot whose discussion I put a response to. I don't know if there's a way to track that, like specifically, or can we turn off our notifications other than turning them off in email? Is there a way to modify it on the discussion?
Yep. Great question. As yours should look similar to mine. And I need to do this. I need to subscribe to it because I do need every one of those emails, but you don't.
Yeah.
So that's a button you should be able to click right there. So for you, everybody, you guys should, if you want to unsubscribe. And as a matter of fact, I thought I had the
see it.
settings
Okay.
as such a way where you did not. Whoops. You shouldn't have
Okay,
been
it
automatically.
was originally, and I may have just done
Okay.
this myself. It was originally an unsubscribe with the button subscribe to. And
Oh, okay, yeah.
I knew. So I'm like, oh, I have to subscribe to this. So if we hit unsubscribe, we don't get all of those emails.
Correct.
The
Yeah.
one
And again,
million
it's set
okay.
up to where you shouldn't be automatically subscribed.
Yeah, it's right. I subscribe myself. So now I see. Okay, awesome.
Okay, yeah. But to answer your question, and I hate this about Moodle, I wish I could fix it, but it's way out of my wheelhouse. I feel like you should be able to unsubscribe, but at least get notifications on things that you've replied to,
Right.
But
Yeah.
no, it doesn't do that. And I have
Okay.
no advice on how to track it. So
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. We'll
Okay.
just keep notes, so it's okay.
All right. So in that case, we can move on to the module 2 discussion. And the next word for attendance will be example. That is the next word for attendance. So here we go, really quickly. As the human population approaches carrying capacity, which is a concept that you learn in Module 2, we essentially have two solutions. We can either reduce human population growth. I did that on purpose. I bolded that for a reason. I'll talk about that in a second. Or we can increase carrying capacity. So before I even go further, these are two concepts that I'm trying to. The purpose of this discussion is really to demonstrate that you understand these two concepts. Right. So I'm not really worried about your opinion on human population growth. Your opinion. I'm not worried about your opinion on it, but I do want to make sure you understand these concepts. Right. So that being said, let's move forward. Post one possible solution and list only one advantage and one disadvantage. Right. So whether you choose reduce human population growth, right? You wouldn't write that, or you would, but then you'll come up with a solution. So you won't just leave it at reduce human population growth. You would come up with a way to reduce human population growth. And I'm going to give one example, and now no one can use it because I'm about to use it, and it's really off the wall. But you could put, I think we should legalize dueling again, because dueling would, people would kill themselves, and therefore the population would not grow as much, right? That's ridiculous. But that is an example. You don't use that example, but there you go. That is one way to reduce human population growth or increase carrying capacity. And I don't even want to come up with a solution to that because there's so many options. I don't want to take any way. But yeah, the other one is to increase carrying capacity. And you should know this as you read it, but carrying capacity is in this context, it's the number of humans that Earth can sustain, right? So we obviously need to either stop adding so many humans to the population, or we need to make it to where we can sustain more. So that's it, right? So you come up with a solution, one or the other. And then I bolded this for a reason too, one advantage and one disadvantage. And the reason I only want you to list one is because people are going to reply to you and they're going to list one advantage and one disadvantage. So if you list a bunch of advantages and disadvantages, then you've taken away opportunities for other people to list advantages and disadvantages. And that's why that's bolded. And really quick, I want to focus on this word, human population growth. So this discussion is not about reducing human population. I'm not talking about killing people, or reducing births. Though, if you wanted to, you could talk about killing people or reducing births. It's up to you. But we're talking about reducing human population growth. So let's say, for example, right now, currently the human population growth rate is at 1.2. And then let's say we reduce it down to 1.1. So by doing that, we are still adding, the population is still growing. It's still getting bigger and bigger. So this discussion is only about just making it get bigger, but not as quickly, right? Or, and again, if you wanted to, you could talk about reducing it to the point where the human population growth is actually going down, but that's not the purpose of this discussion. It could be, but the point is talking about human population growth rate, right? Reducing the rate, not killing people. That's a common mistake I normally see. And unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read any of these because unfortunately I was not subscribed and I wasn't getting an email saying that you guys have done it. So any questions about that concept, about the idea of human population growth? All right. I think that's pretty much it. Those are the biggest mistakes. And again, you can watch this little video that gives some information. But again, the idea here is we're going to reduce the human population growth or we're going to increase carrying capacity. And like I mentioned earlier, once you've written your paper, this is what you need to look at. This is your little rubric. Make sure you've met all these requirements. And based on previous semesters, yeah, here's the big one I see right here, right? So sometimes people just say, "Oh, I think we should increase population growth," and here's why. But again, you need to come up with a way to increase population, or excuse me, decrease population growth, right? Or increase carrying capacity. You don't want to just say decrease population growth or increase carrying capacity. You need to explain how. Technically, if your idea has been used before, you will lose 1 point. I don't have time to go and double check that. But I will say this, as I'm grading, and I grade them in the order in which they were received, if it pops into my head that I know I've read that before, then yeah, you're going to lose a point because that means most likely it's been used a lot if I remember it. Again, you need to list one advantage. You need to list one disadvantage, and they'll lose points if you do more because again, this is for the sake of your classmates. And here we go. This is kind of big too, because again, this is the purpose of this discussion. It's not the purpose is to demonstrate that you understand these two concepts. So whether you're talking about population growth or carrying capacity, you need to define both, and then you need to explain how they're related. What your idea is related to both. So even if your idea is about increasing carrying capacity, then you could just have one quick little sentence about, and if we could increase carrying capacity, then we could maintain this high population growth, and then define it. Does that make sense? Right? Because they're related to each other, so you need to define both and at least have one sentence where you combine both to whatever your idea was. Any questions about that? All right, good. And once again, I'll reiterate, you have to properly use sources. And if you don't remember how, there's how you do it. And then once again, I'll reiterate this, very important, well, not very important, but very helpful, I think. It would take me no time for you to meet me online and let me just look over your discussion before you post it. Even if it just wants to be like, hey, will this get any credit? And if I could look at it, be like, yeah, that'll give you credit. And then you go on your way. Or, spend a little extra time and say, you might want to change this. You might want to add that. You might want to delete this, right? Other ways to help you increase or improve your grade. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I have for this discussion. Are there any questions about the Module 2 discussion? All right, then let's see. Oh yeah, one thing. And someone sent me an email before they did it. Very smart. And someone inevitably tries to make this political. And depending on how you do it, you're probably not necessarily going to lose points for it, but I'm recommending you don't. So if we're talking about immigration, for example, then you're focused on the population of the United States. Well, assuming that's the immigration you're talking about. We are looking at this as from the environmental biology, right? So in this discussion, we're looking at the entire Earth. So unless you get really, really specific, it doesn't matter if this person's in Mexico or if they're in the United States, right? They're going to use sort of resources, right? So again, this is not a political class, and this question isn't meant to be political. So you're gonna have to really be, I don't know how to put it, very careful if you're going to try to make it political. But my suggestion is don't make it political. I really don't care what you think about immigration. And I'm not going to tell you what I think about immigration. This class is not a place to try to share political ideology. I don't do it, and I hope the students don't. Now, granted, sometimes we do need to discuss politics, as you'll see in the next module, but I don't want to make it political. Which again, this is why I have this little thing right here, like using emotion rather than logic. So very often when people do try to make it political, then they start getting emotional and start slinging insults and things like that. So anyway, any questions about the Module 2 discussion before we finally, well, I won't say finally, before we move on quickly to the Module 2 lab?
Just real quick. So
yes, good.
Just wanted to make sure I had the right concept. So of course, we're making sure we're looking at global numbers and things like that. We really don't need to hone in on like just US numbers.
Correct. It would be more work for you because then you'd have to say something like, you'd have to make the argument like, well, if people are living in this part of Mexico, then they're going to use, I don't know. And they're, I don't know. I would talk to you, not privately, but when I'm not wasting everyone else's time to talk about that, you'd have to get like really nitpicky to somehow make this actually about global population growth and global carrying capacity. Yeah, good question. Now we can on the next module, we'll actually dig into that a little bit more. We actually do start talking about the United States, and there it does get a little bit more political. But even then, and we'll talk about that next week, even then it's still a stretch. But yeah, great question. Any other questions? All right, next one, Lab 2. I really wish we could have had this meeting earlier in the week because people have already started making some mistakes. But as usual, you click there. You open up the document, you make yourself a copy. I want to point this out. People have made this mistake. It's an easy mistake to make, but I try to make it not easy. You need to watch this little video while answering these questions before you start your lab. This is why it says in bold, you will get 0 credit for the lab if you don't do this before you do the lab. This is why I have this little side note that says, do not skip this. This is why when you get down here in big yellow letters, it says, do not start this part of the lab unless you have done the pre-lab video and the questions above. So make sure you do that. If you haven't already, and you've already turned in the lab and I haven't graded it, just do it, right? Because again, I'm in a hurry, so I'm not going to be checking the date that this was submitted versus when that was submitted. So as long as that's done before I grade it, you're good to go. At least one person has already turned in the lab without doing this. And if you have, and you lose points for that, I'm going to jump ahead real quickly. There is this extra credit video at the end that you can watch about evolution, not just natural selection, but evolution, which is all kinds of different types of evolution. Where is it at? Yeah, this. Nope. Where is it? Good grief. Here. Yeah, this one. So anyway, that is an option, right? So if you happen to turn in the paper or turn in your lab without doing the pre-lab video, you'll still need to do the pre-lab video, but instead of getting the 0, like I told you would in the directions, to make up for that, you can just do this so-called extra credit video. And in your case, it won't be extra credit. It'll just be extra work, like to make up for the mistake. So any questions about that before we dive into some of the things in this lab? Okay. So it's pretty straightforward. I think, let me see, make sure we're still recording. I should have done that earlier. Manage recording. Yes, good. We're still recording. Anyway, as you mentioned earlier in your questions, basically what you're doing is you're reading this website and you're answering questions. And I know this sounds silly, but essentially all I'm doing is making sure that you actually did read and go through the website and hopefully that you understood it, which goes back to her question about copying and pasting. Preferably you don't, because anybody could do that without thinking. But yeah. That's what you're supposed to do. This just provides proof. In my opinion, this is one of the easier labs, and it's also one of the least effective labs. But there's not much we can do. If you guys come up with a better lab that's good for Module 2, please let me know. But this is the best I have so far. Anyway, let's talk about some common mistakes. Question 29 is a 2-part question, so be careful of that. Make sure you answer both parts. Be very careful. Be very careful with question 31, especially after question 30, because they kind of go hand in hand. And a lot of times people make this mistake. I'll go ahead and give you some hints here. What are the results of the Industrial Revolution? So according to this website, it has to do with smoke, right? And then this next question saying what the dark color of the moths was caused by what? And I'll just go ahead and tell you, it's not the smoke. So just read carefully and then answer that question. Which is a good time to remind you. Again, like I already said, these answers need to come from that website because it just gives me proof that you read that website, right? So make sure you're not just like looking these up Like, oh, what were the results of the Industrial Revolution? Don't go to your Google machine and look it up, right? I don't care. There's all kinds of results of the Industrial Revolution. I'm curious. I want you to show me what the website said. And that goes for this whole semester. Unless it specifically states otherwise, your answer should always come from what I provided you, whether it be the worksheet or a particular website. Don't get me wrong. I love you. You can and should look at other sources, which is why we have discussions. But in these labs, I usually want to focus you on specific sources. Anyway, any questions about these two questions? All right. What is natural selection? Your answer should basically summarize the website's description in your own words. Yes. So just read what the website says. And then this is one of those times I don't want you to copy and paste. I just want to look and make sure that you get the concept. And this is kind of like me. This one's less about proof that you read the website. This one's more about me gauging to see if you understand what natural selection is. So this is important. This allows me to correct you when you're wrong and give you some feedback. And a lot of times you might not lose points, but I'll give you the feedback and you can, learn a little bit more about natural selection. Any questions about number 32? All right. Let's see. Some of these are all pretty straightforward. This one. Okay. How do scientists test theory? The reason I have this sentence where it says pay attention, don't just copy and paste. That's because the most common mistake I've seen for the almost 10 years I've been doing this is they'll say something like, scientists test theories by making predictions, and they leave it at that. And this goes to show people aren't thinking. I want you to think. I don't want you to putting words in. If you think about that, is that really testing a theory? Like, can I test the theory of natural selection by saying, I predict that humans will have 4 arms in 1,000 years, right? I just made a prediction, but did I test the theory of evolution? No, right? So that's my hint. Think about what you're writing. Just don't go writing anything down. Anyway, any questions about number 36? All right. Some other common mistakes, releasing them. Yeah. Okay. Question 42 is a 2-part question. Be careful for that. I know this seems silly, but a lot of people cheat, and hopefully this only takes you like 2 seconds. You can just go Google this. Hopefully, even if you have the same answer, it's usually written in a slightly different way. So just answer this question, write it. This is just one of my ways of comparing. If I suspect 2 people of cheating, this is one of those things I look at. Like, how would you guys have the same exact answer written in the same exact way? Anyway, don't need to worry about that. Just wanted to let you know that was the reasoning behind that question. Any questions about that? All right. Playing the game. All right. So this is where we finally get, I'm going to say the meats and potatoes of it, but yeah, you're going to do a simulation on that website that I already gave you, that I haven't opened up yet in this meeting. But on that website, you're going to pretend like you're a bird. Don't try to prove a point. Just try to get as many, eat as many moths as you can. And that'll make sense once you do it, if you haven't done it already. And this is a common mistake I see. To make sure that you're not just trying to prove a point, you're not like in the dark forest trying to eat all the dark moths just so you can be like, oh no, I can still see the dark moths. I don't care. Don't worry about that. Get as many as you can. And as a matter of fact, you need to get at least 40. Then if you didn't get 40, you need to go back and do it again. And again, I get it, especially if you're one of those people, if you don't believe in natural selection, you're really trying to prove a point to me. I don't care. It's a moth simulation. You have your beliefs. I have mine. It doesn't matter to me. So just do the simulation. Try to get as many moths as you can. Enter your percentages. How many did you get in the light forest? How many did you get in the dark forest? What are the percentages? So on and so forth. Anyway, another common mistake I see from that is some people forget to include the screenshot. So once again, when you're done with those 2 simulations, I want you to screenshot it, because that provides me proof that you actually did it, because anybody can just go in here and put some numbers. So that's your proof. That's my proof that you actually did it. And again, in your screenshot, I want the whole screen. Like here, you can see all my little browsers, and you can see what's down here, and you can see the date and the time. So yeah, make sure you include all that. Any questions about the screenshot? All right. The next thing you want to be careful of is your percentages. This is a common mistake, but since they're percentages and there's only 2 of them, they should equal 100. So maybe if you have 0%, 100%, that's good. 80% and 20%, that's good. 70% and 40%, not good, right? If it doesn't add up to 100, you're gonna miss your points. So yeah, make sure they add up to 100. Any questions about that? All right, you can do some extra credit and make a graph if you want. That's up to you. Let's see. Final analysis. No one's ever messed that up. 48 is good. All right. Explain the natural causes. All right. So this version of this question is slightly new for this semester because a lot of times people they don't ever seem to write what I want them to write. So for that reason, I've included some keywords that you need to use and you want to have them in bold. Like all of your words should not be in bold except these keywords if possible. But these are some words you need to think about. Like, just make sure you use every single one of these words. And again, this is, in my opinion, is one of the more important questions. It's only worth 1 point like the rest of them, but I can gauge based on how you answer this if you really understand natural selection or not. And that's important for me as a teacher because if you mess this question up, I can say, hey, let me help you. I want to meet with you. Let's make sure you understand this concept. It's a very important concept. Okay. Next, are there any questions about number 49? All right, really quickly, number 50. If there were no predators in the forest, would the colors of the moths change over time? Now, based on this website and this lab, there's a simple answer. There's a yes or no answer. There's a very simple one. However, if you've read your textbook, and that would have been fine. Like if you just give me that answer, that would be fine. But if you've read if you know more about evolution, and this is like this lab is not your only introduction to evolution, then it's a little bit more complicated than yes or no, and that's why I have defend this answer. So you can't just say yes or no. You have to explain why you think the colors of moths would or would not change over time. And again, this is just as important as question number 49 because it helps me gauge to see if you truly understand the concepts, and a lot of times people don't. So this is why I have these questions. They're very important. It allows me to again gauge whether or not you understand it, and then if not, then I can let you know that we should talk. So any questions about number 50? All right, question 51 is kind of the same as that other one about the music. This is another one of those little hidden gems where actually, you know what, I'll just leave it at that. Just answer the question. I want to get to know you better. We'll just leave it at that. Again, make sure you download it as a PDF before you upload it. There's extra credit here if you want to do it. And that's all I have for the Module 2 lab. Does anybody have questions about the Module 2 lab? All right, this will be really quick then. So we're almost done. So I just want to reiterate again, as always, every week you have a quiz due. So make sure you do that. Don't forget, it's unlimited. You can take it as many times as you want. I did have one great email where someone's like, hey, I don't know which questions I got wrong. That's on purpose. I hate to do it that way, but if you didn't get full credit and you don't know which ones you got wrong, I want you to take the time and look up your answers and truly learn from your mistakes. And that's the way to do it, other than saying, yep, you got that wrong. And then since you're allowed to take this as many times as you want, actually that says 15. I need to fix that. But anyway, then all you have to do is keep retaking it. And it's a multiple choice quiz. So all you have to do is take it 4 times. And, eventually you're going to figure out the right one, not because you figured it out, just by a process of elimination. And I don't want that. I want you to think. So that's why you don't know the correct answers until after the quiz is closed. Anyway, any questions about the quiz? All right, really quickly, the exam is also due this Sunday. You have 50 questions to take, 50 minutes to take 50 questions. If you want more time, you need it. Well, technically it's too late to contact me, but we could try. Contact me. Let's see if we can find a time to meet. For example, I have to get off of here in at least 10 minutes because I'm meeting one of your classmates because they are going to take this exam. They're going to have their screen they're going to share their screen like I am. Their camera's going to be on so I can see them. Their microphone's going to be on so I can hear them. And then I'll know they're taking a closed book exam and I don't care how long it takes them to take it. So make sure you do that. And then finally, in the announcements, like I said, when I first posted this announcement this week, I said, make sure you check back because I will share a study guide. So I think it's the second to last announcement here. Yep, this is where I updated it. Here is your study guide. There's one. Well, I'll just go ahead and show it to you. There's one question, right? This is it. There's 50 questions on the exam. Of course, they're going to be shuffled, but each one of them is represented here. So this narrows it down to what you need to know. And I will point this out, even though it's already right here. There's a lot of apps out there that help you cheat. So because of that, a lot of these questions are very oddly worded, and I've used different colors. So if you see anything like this, right, read the thing in red, and you can ignore everything else. Jude Law is an actor. Speaking of law, and then finally we get to the question: what is the first law of thermodynamics? Right. So make sure you're aware of that. Be prepared for it. And again, if you need more time, because I can see how that could slow you down. If you need more time to take the exam, let me know. We can meet online, and you can take as long as you need. Whew. Oh, yeah. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you is I'm going to go back to module 2 discussion, even though it's a little late in the game, if I can think of it and have the time to do it. And I'm going to start an extra credit thread. And I'm going to advise you after, as you're working on the study guide, if there's a question you can't find the answer to, like let's say you can't find the answer to question 12, I want you to post it there in the discussion. Say, hey, can anybody answer number 12 for me? And then you'll get a little extra credit for that. And then if anybody replies and gives you an answer, then they'll get a little extra credit. And then if they're specific and say, oh yeah, the answer to number 12, here it is, and I found it on page blah, 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 then they'll get even more extra credit. So basically, I want you guys to have a study group, the whole class, which you should do on your own, but I'm also giving you some incentive to do so. Hopefully I can do that today. Whoo, man, I've used almost an hour of your time, guys. I'm sorry. Speaking of which, the last word for attendance is times or time. I don't care which one you use. And don't forget, you need to come up with also one question that you've come up with. Again, even if you think you understood everything I said and you just want to verify, send those to me. You'll get your 5 points of extra credit. And do you guys have any questions before we end this meeting? Very good.
Nope.
Oh, good. Go ahead.
No questions.
Oh, sorry, you said nope. Okay. Well, all right.
It's okay. Yep.
As always, if anyone thinks of any questions, let me know. And please let me give you some feedback. And please let me look at your stuff before you submit it, right? Let's look at these before and afters and let me help you. And I'm about to stop recording. And now that we